holidays had always been my favorite time of year. I cherished the warmth of family gatherings, the laughter echoing around the dinner table, and the love that seemed to fill every corner of the house. Christmas was meant to be a time of joy, peace, and togetherness, a time when family bonded, shared memories, and created new ones. At least, that's what I had always believed. For me, the holidays had always been a reflection of what truly mattered in life. It was the one time of year when we put aside our differences, looked past the struggles of everyday life, and celebrated the people who meant the most to us. I never imagined that one holiday could shatter that perfect illusion so completely. This particular Christmas, my son Daniel suggested that I join him and his wife Laura for the holiday. They had a beautiful home, and I always assumed it would be a lovely time spent together. I never expected to be excluded, never imagined that someone I had loved and raised for so many years would push me out. But the moment came, and it hit like a ton of bricks. Laura, my daughter-in-law, came from a wealthy family. Her world was far different from mine. I lived a simple life, 74 years old, a widow with a small house by the sea. My days were spent in peace, surrounded by the constant rhythm of the waves and the company of my 2 cats. That was all I needed. But as I looked around at the life my son had built with his wife, I never thought there would be a problem with me being part of it. After all, we were family, or so I thought. But when Daniel suggested we spend Christmas with Laura's family, I thought it was a simple family decision. Nothing that would make me feel like an outsider. At first, when they asked me to join them for the holiday, I thought they were just being polite. I didn't realize that deep down, they already had reservations. It was Laura's words that would change everything. As we sat in their extravagant living room, she turned to me with that icy, superior smile I had come to know all too well. Her tone was calm, but her words cut through the air like a sharp blade. "You just don't fit in with my family, Sophie," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're too old, too simple. It's just not the right setting for you." Those words echoed in my mind long after they were spoken. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Here I was, trying to fit into the world my son had built with his wife, and instead of being welcomed, I was dismissed. My throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I had always tried to be understanding of Laura, to accept her despite her coldness toward me. But this moment was different. This was no longer a mere misunderstanding. It was the harsh reality of my place in their lives. I looked to Daniel for support, but what I saw made my heart sink. He stood there, silent. His eyes avoided mine, his posture stiff. It was as if he had already made up his mind. His loyalty was no longer to me, but to Laura. My son, the one I had raised and sacrificed for, was now standing beside the woman who had no respect for me, treating me as if I were an inconvenience. I wanted to fight back. I wanted to argue, to let them know how much this hurt, but the words caught in my throat. It was as if I had been silenced, relegated to the background, a relic of the past who no longer fit into their perfect world. But then Daniel spoke, his voice soft and apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his words like a slap to my face. "Laura thinks it's better if you don't come." And just like that, I was out. I wasn't wanted anymore. I didn't cry that night. I sat there, alone, telling myself it was okay. I had my cats, after all. But deep inside, something broke. I felt invisible. I had been cast aside, no longer a part of their lives. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. The silence in the air seemed to press down on me, heavier than any Christmas could ever feel. And yet, I told myself I was fine. I could spend the holiday alone. But as I sat in the stillness, I realized just how wrong I was. It wasn't just about the Christmas holiday. It wasn't about a simple gathering with my son and daughter-in-law. It was about the fact that I had been cast aside, treated like I didn't matter anymore. And that hurt more than I could put into words. I didn't cry. Not then. Not that night. But I would. And soon, I would find the strength to rise again. This wasn't the end. No, it was only the beginning of something far greater. Christmas had always been a time when I felt connected to my family. It was a season that I believed was meant for love and unity. A time when old grudges could be forgotten and families could come together to celebrate. However, the Christmas that changed everything would prove that not all families shared the same vision of togetherness. It all began when my son, Daniel, suggested that I spend Christmas with him and his wife, Laura. Their lavish home, which I had only seen a few times, seemed like a beautiful place to celebrate the holidays. Daniel was eager for us to spend time together, and I thought this was a chance to bond with his wife, despite the tension I had always felt with her. I never imagined that the invitation would come with a hidden cost. Laura came from an affluent family, a world I had never quite felt part of. Growing up, my life had been modest. I was used to simplicity, finding comfort in the little things, like the sound of the waves crashing outside my home by the sea, or the companionship of my 2 cats. I never expected to be treated as an outsider in my own son's life, but when Laura entered the picture, things started to change. At first, I thought they were simply trying to include me out of politeness, a gesture of family inclusion. I never considered that they might not want me there. After all, I was Daniel's mother. I had been there for him, supporting him through every stage of his life. I never imagined that a simple holiday invitation would lead to such a deep wound. The night before Christmas, I arrived at their home, a place filled with grand decorations, glimmering lights, and the laughter of a family gathered for what I thought would be a warm holiday. Daniel had promised me that I would feel welcome, that it would be a time of family bonding. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt the coldness that had become all too familiar. The turning point came when I sat with Daniel and Laura in their living room. I had tried to make small talk, to make my presence known in a way that felt comfortable. But I could tell something was off. The smiles were stiff, the conversation forced. It wasn't the warm embrace of family I had imagined. Laura's icy demeanor was the first sign that I didn't belong, and I felt it deep in my bones. Then, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, Laura spoke the words that would change everything. "You just don't fit in with my family, Sophie," she said, her tone condescending, as though she were stating the obvious. "You're too old, too simple. This isn't the right setting for you." It was as if time stood still. I stared at her, trying to process what had just been said. The woman who had married my son, the woman I had tried so hard to accept, was telling me that I wasn't welcome in her world. My heart dropped, and my throat tightened. This wasn't just a casual remark. It was a dismissal of me as a person, as a mother, as a member of their family. I turned to Daniel, hoping he would stand up for me. But he didn't. He stood there, silent, as if he had already made his choice. Laura's words were like a knife in my heart. But what cut deeper was Daniel's silence. He didn't speak up, didn't try to defend me. He had already chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. "I'm sorry, Mom," Daniel said, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "Laura thinks it's better if you don't come." That was it. Just like that, I was out. I wasn't wanted. I wasn't needed. My place in their lives had been taken, away with a few cold, cutting words. I left their home that night, pretending I was okay. I tried not to show the hurt, not to let them see how deeply their rejection had cut me. But as I sat alone in my little house by the sea, the truth sank in. I wasn't welcome. I wasn't part of their life anymore. The silence in my home felt deafening, and I couldn't escape the feeling that something fundamental had been ripped away. That Christmas night, I didn't cry. I held back the tears, telling myself it was fine. After all, I had my cats, I had my routine. But inside something had broken. I had been cast aside, dismissed by my own son and his wife. Like I no longer mattered. I had been excluded from the family that I thought was mine. It wasn't just about the holiday. It was about the fact that my son had chosen his wife over me. It was about the realization that the family I had always tried to be a part of, the family I had loved and supported for so many years, no longer had room for me. I wasn't just excluded from Christmas. I was excluded from their world. As I sat alone, I realized how deep the pain went. I had always thought that family would be there for me, no matter what. But now, I understood. Family doesn't always mean unconditional love. Sometimes it means being pushed aside when you no longer fit into someone else's plans. But I would not let this break me. I wouldn't let their cruelty define who I was. That night, I made a decision. I would reclaim my dignity, my sense of self. I wasn't going to let them erase me. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. The night I was excluded from their Christmas celebration, I didn't know how to process the weight of the situation. It wasn't just about the holiday dinner I was left out of. It was the deep, piercing realization that my son, Daniel, and his wife, Laura, no longer valued me. It was about a more painful truth, that I no longer belonged in their world. The hurt wasn't just from being excluded from a family gathering, but from the way I had been silently erased from their lives. It felt like I had been cast aside, no longer considered important enough to be a part of their world. I had given my son everything, yet here I was, treated like an inconvenience. That night, as I sat alone in my empty house by the sea, the silence felt louder than ever. My 2 cats sat beside me, offering silent comfort, but their presence couldn't fill the hollow space that had formed in my chest. I couldn't stop replaying Laura's words in my mind. "You just don't fit in with my family, Sophie." That cruel statement echoed, and I felt a sting each time it resurfaced. What did she mean by that? Was I no longer worthy of being part of my son's life just because I wasn't as wealthy or as polished as Laura's family? I tried to convince myself that it wasn't about me. After all, I could be strong and independent. I could spend the holidays on my own. I had my peaceful home in the constant presence of the ocean. It had always been enough for me, and perhaps that should be enough now. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the holiday I had lost. It was my son, my family, the bond we once shared. In that moment, I realized something far more profound. I had been discarded, and there was no one to stand up for me. Daniel's silence still haunted me. How could he have just stood there, so easily allowing Laura to speak to me with such cold disregard? He didn't defend me, not even when Laura dismissed me so callously. It wasn't just that he wasn't on my side in that moment. It was that he had already made his choice. His loyalty, his love, was now firmly with Laura, and I was no longer part of their lives. He had placed her above me, his own mother, and that hurt in a way I never expected. I wanted to argue with him, to confront him about the pain his silence caused me, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, he told me in the softest voice, almost apologetically, "I'm sorry, Mom. Laura thinks it's better if you don't come." I remember the hollow feeling I got when he said those words. It was as though he had already decided that I didn't belong in their world, that I was no longer needed. The very son I had raised, the son I had sacrificed for all these years, had now cast me aside with one simple statement. That night I didn't cry. Instead, I held back the tears. I told myself it was fine. I could spend Christmas alone just as I had spent so many other days in my life. I had my home, my peace, my cats. But as I sat in the quiet, I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest. The emptiness in my heart was overwhelming. It wasn't just the holiday I was missing. It was the love, the family connection that had been taken from me so effortlessly. And what hurt even more was that Daniel didn't seem to care. I spent the night trying to distract myself, doing my usual routines around the house, but it wasn't the same without him. The house felt colder, emptier. The silence pressed down on me like a heavy weight. It wasn't just the absence of Christmas cheer that felt so painful. It was the absence of my son, the feeling that I no longer mattered in his life. The next day, I didn't cry either. I told myself that I was fine. I had made my peace with it. But inside, I knew the truth. My heart had broken. And it wasn't just about missing a Christmas dinner. It was about the deep betrayal I felt from the people I had trusted most in the world. I had given them my love, my time, and my support, only to be cast aside like I didn't matter anymore. It wasn't just that I had been excluded from Christmas. It was the realization that I had been silently erased from their lives. I wasn't part of their world anymore. Daniel and Laura were building a life without me, and that hurt more than I could ever explain. But something inside me started to shift. I didn't know yet what I would do, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let them take away my sense of self-worth. I had always thought that family was supposed to love you unconditionally, that blood would bind us together, no matter the circumstances. But now I understood that love wasn't always mutual. Sometimes family could be cruel, and sometimes family could choose to forget you. But I wasn't ready to be forgotten. I wasn't ready to just accept that this was the end of my relationship with Daniel. No, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. Something where I would take back control of my life, my dignity, and my future. I wasn't done yet. The night after I had been excluded from Daniel and Laura's Christmas celebration, I sat alone in my house, trying to wrap my mind around the situation. The house felt colder, quieter, and emptier than it ever had before. The gentle rhythm of the waves crashing outside should have been a comfort, but instead it amplified the silence in the room. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely and utterly alone. I had spent my entire life taking care of others, loving them, nurturing them, and supporting them in every way I could. Yet, here I was, pushed aside by the two people I loved the most in the world. Daniel, my only son, had made it clear that I no longer mattered. His silence had spoken volumes, and the weight of it crushed me more than any harsh words could have. Laura, too, had dismissed me with a callousness I hadn't expected, and the pain of that rejection lingered in my heart. I didn't cry that night. I told myself I was fine, that I could get through it. After all, I had always prided myself on my independence. I had built a life for myself after my husband passed away, and I had learned to be alone in a way that many people couldn't. But there was something different about this loneliness. It wasn't just the absence of my son or the empty chair at the dinner table. It was the feeling that I had been cast aside, that I was no longer needed or wanted in the family I had always held dear. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, the phone rang. It was an unexpected call, one that I wasn't sure I wanted to answer, but I did anyway. It was Margaret, one of my old friends. Her voice, warm and familiar, brought me a sense of comfort I hadn't realized I needed. "Sophie, I heard what happened," she said. "You're not going to be alone on Christmas. We're coming over. Don't you dare sit there by yourself." I hadn't expected anyone to reach out to me. I had always been the one to care for others, never the one to lean on someone else. But Margaret's words, her insistence that I wasn't alone, warmed my heart. She, along with a few other friends who had shared so many of life's ups and downs with me, arrived that evening with food, laughter, and most importantly, companionship. They brought the joy and warmth that I hadn't even realized I was missing. We sat around the table, eating, chatting, and sharing stories of our lives. For the first time in days, I felt a connection to someone else. These weren't the people I had once imagined sharing my holidays with, but they were the people who truly cared about me. They weren't interested in what I could offer them. They just wanted to be there for me, and that meant the world. As we sat around the table eating the food they had brought, I found myself talking about the house, the beach house, that my late husband and I had worked so hard to buy. It had always been my dream, a dream we had shared. I had always planned to leave it to Daniel when the time came, thinking it would be the perfect legacy for him. After all, he was my son, and I wanted to give him everything I could. But as I spoke about it that night, surrounded by my friends, I realized something I hadn't considered before. Maybe Daniel didn't deserve it. Maybe Laura didn't deserve it either. I had worked my entire life for that house. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of everything I had built, everything my husband and I had created together. And now I realized that giving it to Daniel, after the way he had treated me, felt wrong. One of my friends, Anna, who had always been a voice of reason in my life, looked at me with kind eyes. "Sophie, you've earned that house," she said. "You don't owe them anything, especially not after the way they've treated you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It was as if a light bulb went off in my mind. I had spent so much time focusing on what I thought I owed Daniel, on how I had always believed that family should come first, that I hadn't considered the fact that I had every right to keep what was mine. Love, I realized, was supposed to be mutual. But Daniel had not loved me in the way that truly mattered. Not anymore. The spark inside me began to grow. I wasn't going to give him the house. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. That night, after my friends had left, I took a long, hard look at my will. For years it had been written with the belief that Daniel would inherit everything. But now, as I thought about how he had treated me, how easily he had allowed Laura to dismiss me, I couldn't bring myself to leave him anything. The house was mine, and I was going to take control of it. It wasn't just about the house, though. It was about something more, something deeper. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my sense of self-worth. I wasn't going to let them take that from me, too. The decision I had made felt final. I wasn't going to be pushed aside anymore. Margaret's visit had given me more than just company on Christmas. It had given me the strength to take back what was mine, to find my voice, and stand up for myself. This was the beginning of something new. I didn't know what would happen next, but I was ready to find out. The days that followed Christmas were some of the most difficult I'd ever faced. The initial shock of Laura's cruel dismissal still stung deeply, but a new feeling began to rise within me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Empowerment. The realization had hit me like a wave crashing against the shore. I no longer had to accept the way I had been treated. I didn't need to just sit back and take it. I could take control. I could make decisions that were right for me. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my own son, dictate my worth. That evening, after spending time with my friends, I realized something profound. The house, which had always been my pride and joy, had taken on a new meaning. It wasn't just a piece of property anymore. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for throughout my life. My husband and I had bought it together, and we had made so many memories there. It wasn't just the house itself that mattered. It was what it represented. It was the life we built, the love we shared, and the dreams we had for the future. I had always intended to pass it on to Daniel, believing that it was his birthright, his legacy. But now, after everything that had happened, I began to question whether he truly deserved it. The way Laura had spoken to me, the way Daniel had stayed silent, watching it all unfold without lifting a finger to defend me. It made me realize that this house, this symbol of my hard work, wasn't for them. It was mine, and I wasn't ready to just hand it over anymore. I had always believed that family should be a source of unconditional love and support, but that belief had been shattered, and it left me questioning everything. Daniel was no longer the young boy who sought my advice and comfort. He was now a man who had placed his wife's wishes above his loyalty to me. The love I had given him throughout his life seemed to have been forgotten, replaced by greed and a desire for more. More property, more wealth, more control. As I sat alone in my house that night, the weight of my thoughts began to shift from sadness to determination. I wasn't going to allow this betrayal to define me. I had worked hard for everything I had, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me, not even my son. The house had always been a part of my plan, to pass it down to him when the time came. But now, after the way he had treated me, I realized that I had every right to change my will. He hadn't earned it, not in the way I had, and if he couldn't respect me as his mother, then he didn't deserve to inherit the one thing that had meant the most to me and my late husband. The decision to take control wasn't easy. I spent hours staring at my will, the document that had been written with love and care for Daniel's future, but now it felt wrong. Every time I thought about it, I felt a sense of unease in my chest. It wasn't just about the house. It was about my dignity, my right to be seen and heard, and my right to decide who would be a part of my life moving forward. After everything that had happened, I couldn't justify giving Daniel the house. Not when I knew he had already chosen Laura's side. Not when I knew he had allowed her to treat me with such disrespect. I wasn't just reclaiming the house. I was reclaiming my power. I wasn't going to be the weak, invisible woman who let others walk all over her. I wasn't going to let my son manipulate me, just as he had been manipulated by his wife. The house was mine, and I would decide what happened to it. The decision was made. I would change my will. I would keep the house for myself, and I would decide who, if anyone, would inherit it. It wasn't about punishing Daniel. It was about standing up for myself, for the woman I had become, and for the life I had worked so hard to build. This was the moment I took back control, and I knew it was just the beginning. After making the decision, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It wasn't a feeling of triumph, but of clarity. I had been giving and giving, but it had never been enough. Now, it was time to give to myself, to stop apologizing for my existence, and to stop seeking approval from those who didn't value me. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone anymore. I didn't need to explain myself. And yet, there was still a lingering sadness, a loss I couldn't fully grasp yet. The relationship with Daniel was no longer what it had been, and I didn't know how to fix it. But I wasn't going to let his silence define me. I wasn't going to be the one who stayed silent any longer. The next steps were uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was no longer the woman I had once been. I was stronger now, more confident. I was reclaiming my life, my dignity, and most importantly, my future. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. After making the decision to take control of my future and change my will, I felt a strange calm come over me. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but a realization that I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. I had spent years putting others first, always giving, always hoping that my love and sacrifices would be enough. But now, I was doing something for myself. I had taken back the one thing that had always been mine, the house. It was mine to keep, mine to decide what to do with, and no one, not even my son, could take that away from me. But even as I felt this sense of resolve, I knew the battle wasn't over. I had no illusions about what would come next. Daniel and Laura weren't going to just accept my decision without a fight. They had already shown how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. The moment I changed my will, I knew it would ignite a firestorm that I wasn't entirely prepared for. The first signs of trouble came sooner than I expected. Weeks passed in relative quiet, but the underlying tension was thick. Daniel hadn't tried to reach out. Neither had Laura. I knew they were planning their next move. I could feel it in the air, an unsettling sense of impending conflict that seemed to hang over me like a storm cloud. Then came the call that changed everything. I was sitting in my living room, enjoying the solitude I had found after the holiday chaos, when the phone rang. The caller ID displayed my lawyer's name, Thomas, the one I had trusted with everything, the one who had helped me make the original will. My heart skipped a beat as I picked up the phone. "Sophie," Thomas said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "We need to talk. It's about your will." The calm I had felt after making my decision quickly slipped away. My stomach tightened, and I immediately feared the worst. Had Daniel gotten to him? Had he convinced my lawyer to change the will behind my back? My mind raced with questions as I tried to steady my breath. "What about it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel my pulse quickening with anxiety. There was a long pause on the other end. When Thomas finally spoke, his words came slowly, carefully. "I think we need to review the document again," he said. "There's something in it we didn't discuss. Something has changed, Sophie. I'm afraid the will has been altered." The blood in my veins ran cold. I felt my heart drop to my stomach. I had expected something like this, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. What had Daniel done? Had he manipulated Thomas to make changes without my knowledge? I could barely contain my anger and frustration as I pressed him for more information. "What do you mean, altered?" I demanded, my voice sharp with disbelief. "You mean someone changed it without my consent? Was it Daniel?" Thomas hesitated again, the tension clear in his voice. "Sophie, I didn't question it at first," he said almost apologetically. "But Daniel came in several times, asking for changes to the will. He insisted that you would want the house to go to him, that it was what you had always planned." My blood boiled. Daniel hadn't even bothered to talk to me about it directly. Instead, he had gone behind my back, using my trusted lawyer to manipulate the situation in his favor. I had spent my entire life supporting him, only for him to betray me so easily. I was livid. How could he do this? How could he allow Laura to manipulate him into taking what wasn't his? "Did you take his word for it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did you just let him make changes to my will without even asking me?" Thomas seemed to shrink on the other end of the line. "I should have questioned it," he admitted. "But I didn't. I was led to believe it was what you wanted. I'm sorry, Sophie. I should have stood up for you." His apology felt hollow. The damage had already been done. I had trusted Thomas to keep my interests safe, but now I was left questioning his loyalty. My son had used him, and Thomas had allowed it. The betrayal was deeper than I had ever imagined. "I don't trust you anymore," I said, my voice firm with finality. "This is over, Thomas. I don't need your help anymore." I slammed the phone down, my anger surging with every passing second. I couldn't believe what had just happened. My own son had used my lawyer to manipulate my will behind my back. I was being erased from my own life, and the people I had trusted most had failed me. But I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let Daniel and Laura win. I wasn't going to let them take what was mine. The days that followed were filled with a quiet storm of planning and determination. I began looking for a new lawyer, someone who would fight for me, someone who would respect my wishes and help me get back what I had lost. I wasn't going to back down. I had already made my decision, and I was ready to see it through, no matter what it took. Daniel had underestimated me. He thought he could manipulate me into submission, thought he could take everything I had worked for. But he was wrong. I was going to fight for what was mine, and I wasn't going to let him, or anyone, take it from me. The battle had only just begun, and this time, I was ready. The decision I had made to take control of my life and my inheritance was only the beginning. As the days passed, it became clear that my son, Daniel, and his wife, Laura, weren't going to just accept my decision quietly. They had already shown how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted, and I knew the legal battle was inevitable. The calm after my decision was quickly replaced by tension, and I felt the weight of what was coming. I wasn't sure when or how it would happen, but I knew I had to prepare for the storm that was about to hit. The call came sooner than I expected. It was from my new lawyer, Richard, a sharp and determined man who I had hired after the betrayal. From Thomas, Richard had been reviewing the case and getting all the necessary documents in order. The moment he told me that Daniel had filed for a court case to challenge my decision, I knew this was going to be a battle like none I had ever faced before. The house was no longer just a home. It had become the focal point of everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed for my family. As the court date approached, I spent sleepless nights wondering what would happen next. The thought of facing Daniel in a courtroom, of him challenging me in such an intimate way, filled me with dread. This wasn't just a legal dispute. It was a deeply personal matter. My relationship with Daniel had been built on love, sacrifice, and years of memories. But now, all of that seemed to have been thrown away, as if it meant nothing. I couldn't help but feel a sharp pang in my heart every time I thought about it. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The courthouse was filled with people, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This wasn't just a legal case. It was the culmination of months of hurt, betrayal, and anger. I had made the decision to stand up for myself, but standing in that courtroom, knowing that my son was sitting across from me, was one of the hardest things I had ever done. Daniel and Laura were already seated across the room when I entered. I could see the anger in their eyes, the way they exchanged glances, as if they had already made up their minds about the outcome. Laura sat stiffly beside Daniel, her arms crossed in defiance, her eyes shooting daggers in my direction. I knew she thought she had the upper hand. She had manipulated Daniel into believing he was entitled to everything I had, and now she was determined to make sure he got it. I sat down next to Richard, trying to steady my nerves. The weight of the moment was almost unbearable, but I couldn't let it break me. I had come this far, and I wasn't about to back down now. The judge called the hearing to order, and the tension in the room was palpable. Richard stood and presented the case with calm confidence, laying out the facts clearly and succinctly. He spoke about how Daniel had manipulated the situation, how Thomas had allowed him to make changes to the will without my consent, and how Daniel's actions had been done without my knowledge or approval. As I sat there, listening to Richard's words, I felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. The truth was finally being laid bare. The weight of all the hurt and betrayal I had carried for so long was now being acknowledged. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my legs unsteady but my voice strong. As I looked across the room at my son and daughter-in-law, I saw something in their faces I hadn't expected. Doubt. They had come into this courtroom thinking they would win, but now I could see the cracks in their confidence. I was no longer the woman they could easily push aside. "Raised him," I began, my voice filled with emotion. "I loved him, and for years I gave him everything I had. But now I'm just a convenience to be discarded when it no longer suits him. This house is not just a building. It's a symbol of everything my husband and I worked for. And I won't let him take it. From me. Not like this." The courtroom fell silent. My words hung in the air, and I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me. I had spoken my truth. I had laid my heart bare, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally being heard. Richard stood beside me, his expression filled with pride and determination. He knew that this moment was crucial. It wasn't just about winning a legal case. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my place in the world, and my right to make decisions about my own life. Daniel and Laura exchanged a quick glance, their faces tightening with anger. I could see the realization dawning on them that they might not win this battle. They had underestimated me. They had thought that I would back down, that I would fold under the pressure. But they were wrong. I wasn't going to let them take what was mine, not without a fight. The judge listened carefully to the testimony, and then turned his attention to the room. He spoke with authority, his voice steady. "I've reviewed the evidence presented by both sides," he said. "And it's clear that the actions taken by Daniel and his legal counsel in this case were inappropriate. The house in question will remain under Sophie's name. The change to her will is valid, and it is not to be contested further by Daniel or his wife." The words hit me like a wave of relief. It wasn't over yet, but I had won this battle. Daniel and Laura had lost. They hadn't won the house, and they hadn't won the control they thought they had. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the hearing, I stood there for a moment, taking in the enormity of the decision. I had done it. I had stood up for myself, and I had won. But as I left the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was a reflection of the broken relationship I now had with my son. And while I had won the house, I knew there was still so much more to rebuild. The battle wasn't over yet, but for now, I had taken back what was mine. The days following the courtroom battle were a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. The tension that had hung over me for so long had lifted, but with it came a quiet realization that my victory wasn't as satisfying as I had expected. Yes, I had won the legal battle, and the house, the symbol of everything I had worked for, was still mine. But as I walked back into my house, the silence that greeted me felt heavier than before. The house, once a place of comfort and warmth, now felt like a battleground. The walls, which had witnessed so much of my life, now seemed cold and distant. The victory in the courtroom hadn't brought the peace I had imagined. I had won the fight for my home, but I had lost something far more precious: the relationship with my son Daniel. The distance between us had only grown, and I realized that no matter how much I had won in court, the emotional toll was far greater than I had ever expected. The truth settled in slowly. I had spent so many months fighting, for the house, for my dignity, that I hadn't truly considered what the cost of that fight would be. Daniel's betrayal, his manipulation, had hurt me more than I could ever articulate. But the real pain wasn't just in losing the bond we once shared. It was in the realization that I might never get it back. No matter how much I fought, no matter how much I wanted things to go back to the way they were, the relationship between us had changed irreparably. The days after the hearing felt long and disorienting. I couldn't quite shake the feeling of loneliness that had settled in my heart. Despite the legal victory, despite the knowledge that I had taken control of my life, I found myself questioning what the future held. I couldn't stop thinking about the life I had envisioned for myself, a peaceful existence by the sea, surrounded by family, love, and support. But now, that vision seemed out of reach. I spent more time than I care to admit, staring out at the ocean, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below. The sea, which had always been a source of solace for me, now seemed distant, as if even it was reminding me of everything I had lost. The calm I had once found in the rhythm of the tides now felt hollow. I had always turned to the sea for comfort, but now I realized that comfort could not fill the emptiness I felt inside. I had fought so hard to hold on to what I had, but in the process, I had lost the one thing I had cherished the most, my relationship with my son. Then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the phone rang. It was Daniel. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I wasn't prepared for the change in his voice. It was softer than it had been in months, almost apologetic. "Mom, I know things have been difficult between us," he began. "But this isn't right. You need to fix the will. You can't just take the house away from me and Laura." I wasn't surprised by his call, but I was taken aback by the desperation in his voice. He sounded like a man who had finally realized the gravity of what had happened. A man who was willing to fight for what he thought was his. But it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about something deeper. Something I hadn't anticipated. "You think you can just walk back into my life and talk to me like everything is fine?" I responded, my voice shaking with emotion. "You've already tried to take from me once. What makes you think I'll give in now?" Daniel's voice faltered, but he pressed on. "Mom, this isn't just about the house. It's about family. You've always said we should take care of each other. This is a family home. I thought you would want us to keep it." His words hit me harder than I expected. There was a part of me that wanted to scream at him, to tell him that this wasn't about money or property. It was about respect. But instead I found myself holding back the tears. I couldn't let him manipulate me any longer. The anger I had been holding on to for so long started to resurface, but I refused to let it consume me. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Daniel," I said quietly. "I don't know if we can just pick up where we left off, but I'm willing to try." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, as if he were searching for the right words. "I'm sorry, Mom," he finally said. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to try to make things right. I don't want to lose you." For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. I didn't know if things could ever go back to the way they were, but for the first time in a long time, I was willing to try. I was willing to rebuild. That night, as I sat in my living room, I realized that this wasn't just about the house. It was about something far more important: healing. I had spent so long fighting for control, fighting for my dignity, that I had forgotten to think about the future. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time I felt like I had taken a step toward something more meaningful. A chance at rebuilding not just my relationship with Daniel, but my sense of self and my place in the world. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew that whatever happened, I was ready to face it. The victory in the courtroom had been important, but it was only the beginning of the journey. What mattered now was the road ahead, the chance to rebuild, to find peace, and to reclaim the life I had always deserved. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time I felt like I was on the path to healing.